We have a few troops missing this morning, among whom are Monique and Kymel, and they are attending at the Silver Lake congregation this morning because Kymel has his first day of flag football and she didn't want to be late. And so just for this Sunday, they're going to be up there at Silver Lake so they can be on time for his festivities this afternoon. All right. So as we know, and I don't ever hesitate to remind us, our theme for the year is sitting at the feet of the Master. And in response to that theme, purely by intuition, I made a decision that I would start in the Sermon on the Mount to get us going in this theme of sitting at the feet of the Master, because that's exactly what we're doing. I would also like to say that I challenge us for the rest of the year, no matter what the Bible class is or what the sermon is, I challenge you to find anything that is said or taught that doesn't somehow directly or indirectly come back to this sermon. So this is kind of like the Big Bang, if you will, is that from here it just expands out. And everything that we talk about is going to come back somehow to these words that Jesus is speaking on this occasion. Can't preach without tech, you know. So what Jesus has been doing is recently in our coverage of this sermon, he's been talking about hypocritical religion. He's talked about his people and their characteristics and the Beatitudes. He's talked about not shrinking back, even though we're persecuted, but we're still blessed. He's talked about the fact that what's most important is the spirit and the purpose of the law as opposed to the mere letter of the law. And then he gets into talking about hypocritical religion. And he's talked about giving, and he's talked about praying, and the fact that those things are not to be done for the purpose of being seen by men. And that really struck me this week in a way it never had before, because I started wondering, why was it so important for the Pharisees to put this show on in front of the people? I mean, they had to know they were faking, that what they were doing wasn't really sincere. But then I remembered that Matthew's account tells us that Jesus was handed over because of envy. And that means when somebody has something that you want, and how they were so concerned that the whole world is going after him, and that they were so respected, as we've talked about, and looked upon as the teachers and the leaders, and the people accepted them as such, and they had respect. They thought it really important to have their people to respect them and to call them rabbi and these things. And I thought, they're trying to preserve a certain kind of a status amongst the people. They want to be seen as the religious leaders. They want to be seen as very spiritual individuals. And so in order to bring that about, at least in some part, they're faking it. Because what else makes any sense? So I just let you in on some of my musings here from the week with regard to this. Now, Jesus, as he continues here, he's going to speak some words, and those words are when you fast. Now, I'm going to admit to you that as I went into the week and thinking about this idea of fasting, and I thought, we'll just skip that. We don't really need to know about that. I said, but wait a minute. It's like the Lord, we're going to go sit at the Lord's feet, and the Lord starts talking about something. We go, well, we don't really need, Lord, just move on. We don't need to think about that. But the Spirit of God would not allow me to hang on to that thought long enough to actually pull it off. And so Jesus is going to speak some words to them that are going to have to do with the idea of fasting. And it's important. And I hope that in the time that I have allotted this morning that I can get the point across, hopefully, that Jesus was getting across when he said, when you fast. And we'll talk about that here in just a moment. And so this is an important subject. And so as we start out and think about the principle of fasting, I took a quote from a man named Tony Evans, and he says here, and at least he quotes it, or the principle of fasting means giving up a craving of the body because you have a deeper need of the spirit. So you see, what was impressed upon me was that this week was that it isn't a matter of not eating. That's not the deal. And you're going to see that real clearly. It's not about not eating food. It's about spiritual nourishment. It's about spiritual need and dealing with spiritual need in a very specific way. Now, one of the things to understand is that the Bible never, ever prescribes fasting for physical reasons. Ever. Another way of saying that is that fasting, and of course we understand what we mean by that, absolute, complete abstinence from food. Fasting in and of itself brings no spiritual benefit by itself. And it is spiritual benefit that the Lord's got in mind here. And so let's understand that first of all. So there's a couple of ways that this subject is looked at. On the one hand, we have what I'll call the superstitious approach, and that says, if I fast, I will be more spiritual. Okay? The second approach is kind of the indifferent attitude that says, why bother even thinking about it? That's where I was going. Okay? You know, why bother? Neither one of those is going to serve us well. So let's get into this morning and let's see if we can mind some things that are going to be serving, some things that do serve us well, and some things that we can get some benefit from. So let's get into it. First of all, fasting is not an isolated spiritual virtue in and of itself. Okay? It's not. Now, when it comes to the physical part, look, there is a physical benefit to fasting. Okay? I'm well aware of it, and it's wonderful. But that in and of itself doesn't bring any spiritual benefit. It is always connected with something else. See, and it's that something else that we're primarily concerned about. Not the fasting per se, but it's the something else. Okay? For a fast to be biblical, it is essential that there be a spiritual context. All right? So as we sit at the feet of Jesus, he says to us, when you fast. Now, fasting is a personal, although we'll see that it is done in a group setting also. It is a personal, non-compulsory, spontaneous, voluntary act with a spiritual purpose. Okay? So it's always connected to something. Okay? And so this is very important. Now, this fact is illustrated in the one fast that was commanded in the Bible. One fast. And that was the fast that had to do with the Day of Atonement. And I believe I remember where this is. If I don't remember where this is, I know it well enough to still talk about it. I do remember. Leviticus 16:29. I'm going to read two verses. One of them is verse 29. And it shall be a statute to you forever that in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall afflict yourselves. Other translations say afflict your souls or deny yourselves. And shall do no work, either the native or the stranger who sojourns among you. In verse 31, it says, it is a Sabbath of solemn rest for you, and you shall afflict yourselves. It is a statute forever. Well, this afflicting the soul, afflicting yourself, humbling your souls, has to do with a fast. And so it was connected here to the Day of Atonement. Well, it was a time of confession of sin and mourning sin and seeking forgiveness for sin. See? It was attached to the Day of Atonement. Okay? And just like Jesus spoke about, blessed are those who mourn, this was a time of mourning for sin. Always attached to something. So this is the one time in the whole Bible that fasting is commanded, which by extension, understanding that means, obviously, that in the New Testament, there is no command to fast. Okay? There's only one time in the Bible. Now, does that mean that people didn't practice fasting? No, doesn't mean that at all. But that means there's only that one time. So we are commanded to give to the needy. If you have an opportunity, you see a need, not only is it good to do it, not only is it honoring God to take that opportunity, it's really in your best interest. Okay, it's really in your best interest when it lies within your power and you see a need, you take care of that need. Because if you don't, Matthew 25 is real clear, you didn't do it to him. And those people who didn't do it to him when they had the opportunity aren't sitting in a real good spot in Matthew 25. Okay? So we're commanded to do that. We're commanded to pray. We know that. We've been talking about prayer. We know that that's something that God wants us to do. There's no question. But never are we told or commanded us to fast. See? And so it is this personal, for us today, non-compulsory, spontaneous, voluntary act with a spiritual purpose. And that's what we're focusing on, the spiritual purpose. Now, when Jesus came on the scene, the Jewish people fasted there was a lot of people who fasted. Okay? And so even though there was that one compulsory fast, it was just a part of the culture of the Jewish people to fast. People fasted. It's sometimes nationally, and as we saw with the Day of Atonement, sometimes in small groups of people fasted, sometimes individuals. Okay. And in the time of Jesus, generally speaking, fasting was something that was done sincerely. You know, it was actually people seeking some kind of a spiritual benefit from it. It was heartfelt. But it turned into this pretentious, hypocritical practice that was done before men. And as we know, as Jesus speaks about this, let's go over here in our text. In Matthew chapter 6. As he speaks about this in verse 16, he says, "And when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites." Okay. "For they disfigure their faces, that their fasting may be seen by others." How would you do that? I'm so hungry. I'm doing this for the Lord. I don't know how to do it. But it just, when you read this, it's like, what in the world is he says, they disfigure their faces that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. It's personal. Okay? And so what these individuals were doing, in essence, they were just not eating. Okay? But not eating in and of itself doesn't make you spiritual any more than eating makes you carnal. It just has no effect, spiritually speaking. And so when Jesus here says, in saying when you fast, he's assuming that his hearers know something about fasting and something about the occasions for fasting. When is fasting appropriate? Okay. And so a statement that is made sometimes is that, yes, Jesus kind of assumed that people would fast, but amongst Christians, there is little understanding about the subject of fasting, and it has a very limited or non-existent place in our religious experience. Or does it? Sometimes I like to take these blanket statements that people make, and I always go, how do you know? What is anybody's religious experience, let alone a whole group of people called Christians? But that is something that is said. But the fact is, first of all, that as we look in our Bible, there was just a ton of people who fasted. Moses, Samson, Samuel, Hannah, Saul, Jonathan, Jehoshaphat, David, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. The list goes on and on. People that fasted, Daniel, John the Baptist, Paul the apostle, Jesus. That's just a partial list. And even though that one commanded fast that was given in connection with the Day of Atonement ended with the law, Jesus knew that that individuals would still fast. He understood that. So he says, when you fast. And perhaps he was referring to people that were observing the Sabbath in connection with the Day of Atonement, perhaps. But when you fast, he knew that people would fast. So when you do, don't do it like a hypocrite. Just like you don't give like a hypocrite, you don't pray like a hypocrite. When you fast, don't be like the people that do it, so others will look at them and think about how very spiritual you are. Okay? He says, look normal. You boil it down, just look normal. Okay? Be normal. Be yourself. And your fasting is between you and it is between God. You and God. Okay? So this is important. Okay? So when you fast, you do it in that way. Now, I think I have a screen here that's going to, yeah, that's the one I want. Let's go over to Matthew chapter 9 for a moment. And this has to do with a question here that's asked about fasting. And it says in verse 14, Matthew 9:14, it says, when the disciples of John came to him saying, or then the disciples of John came to him saying, why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? Okay. And Jesus said to him, can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? Now, isn't that interesting? Okay. Why do the Pharisees and we fast? He says, but your disciples don't fast, Jesus. And the first thing he brings up is mourning. Okay. He didn't say that can the wedding guests fast as long as the bridegroom is with them. He's going to connect, didn't say that by itself. He's going to connect that with mourning. Now, understand that at this time, John the Baptist is probably in prison. His disciples have had to watch their teacher arrested and put in prison, and we know he's never going to get out of there. He's not going to get out of there alive, physically. And so what is their response when their master is taken into prison? They mourn. And in that their fasting is connected with their mourning. It's always connected to something. Now, why were Jesus' disciples not fasting? Well, Jesus tells them here. Okay? He tells them why they're not fasting. Jesus said, in verse 15, can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them. Then they will fast. Okay? I'm hesitating because some questions have nuances to them. I want to try to get this right. So, just ask yourself, Or think about the times when you have wished that Jesus would just come into your living room, sit down with you next to you on the couch, and just talk to you and tell you what he thinks. You ever had that? You know? Now, I will readily tell us that he does tell us what he thinks. We have it. But sometimes don't we just wish he was here? You know, if we're troubled and, you know, maybe we've done wrong or whatever it may be, and we just want him to be there and just, hey, you're going to be okay. I haven't thrown you away. You're still mine. You know, just learn your lesson and stop doing that, right? Just, okay. But we can read about him doing that very thing, so we don't have a, but what I'm saying is that there are challenges in this life. There are challenges that we face in this life because he's not here. We're not with him yet. What's going to happen, do you suppose? Because look, people fast in times of lamentation and sorrow. We know that people, biblically speaking, fast when they need protection. Don't stumble, Daryl. When we need protection, people fast when they're humiliated or when they've done wrong. And the time is coming. It's coming when we won't have to worry about any of that. That will all be over with, and we'll be with the bridegroom. And there won't be any more mourning for sin. There won't be any more persecution. There won't be any more humiliating defeats. No more battling with sin. We'll be with him, and we won't need to fast. But while he's gone, there will be occasions. And this is not mine to judge with regard to anybody in this room. But there will be occasions. As we understand that God's people in all ages not only believed in fasting, but they practiced it. And the reason, in essence, that Jesus says that his disciples, weren't fasting, is because they didn't have any reason to fast. He was with them. Okay? They weren't mourning. John the Baptist's disciples, they were mourning. But his disciples were not. There was no reason. But reasons do come up. And so, you know, the Lord tells us through his teaching in the New Testament that it definitely teaches the rightness and value of fasting. Don't ever question whether or not this is something that would be of benefit. And we see this true in the subsequent history of the church. In Acts 13, while they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul to the work which I have called them." And after fasting and praying, they laid their hands on them and sent them off. Now, those New Testament Christians didn't fast along with their prayer because there's a command. It was because something very important was happening. And they wanted to focus their minds completely. See, and I can't live this for you. I can't experience this for you. And perhaps you know exactly what I'm talking about, and perhaps you don't. But they wanted to be completely focused and centered, laser-centered on the thing at hand. Just like Jesus, when he was all night in prayer, remember? And he came down, and the first thing he did was he called his disciples and chose 12 of them. But he prayed all night. And so there they are putting away the cravings of the body, secondary and completely consumed in the things of God as they send these men out into the world. And Jesus has already told them, the world is going to hate you like it hated me. And you're going to be drug up before councils and kings and the Jews, and all of these things. This is a dangerous situation that they're going out on. And they fasted. And they prayed. Acts 14, when they had appointed elders for them in every church with prayer and fasting, they committed them to the Lord in whom they had believed. Okay. The fasting is always connected to some spiritual purpose. Now, as we wind things down here, God has, as Paul wrote to Timothy, that God richly provides us with everything to enjoy. Right? And as we in this information age are so aware of what's going on throughout the globe, man, we are some of the, I don't want to say lucky, we're just some of the most privileged, blessed, and it's humbling because the people that are suffering in this world don't deserve to suffer like they are any more than I do. But we have so much. So here's what you do with that. Enjoy it. Okay? But know this. In times of spiritual struggle, it is right, and it is good, and it is beneficial to abstain from these good things, set them aside, and give your physical body the message, you ain't the one in charge here. You're secondary. My relationship with God is primary. So I'm going to set you aside. Okay? And there's lots of yummy food to eat. Okay? There's lots of really good things to enjoy, but sometimes there is spiritual struggle, and the Lord knew this, that's going to require for us to set those things aside so that we may be fully concentrated and laser focused on those things, as Paul termed it, that are life indeed. Food, body, that stuff's all going away. But the things that are life indeed, sometimes we need to set those things aside and focus on them. And that's Jesus' point. You're going to struggle. And when you fast, when you fast, don't be a hypocrite. Don't do it so people think you're so spiritual, because not eating food don't make you spiritual. Okay. So I'm glad that I didn't skip fasting, because the Lord wants us to know some things about it, and He wants us to have that tool when it's time when we're struggling mightily against those forces of evil in our lives. If you're here with us this morning, we're so glad that you're here, and that we hope that the Lord's words today have been encouraging. And if you're out there in video land and you don't know the gospel and you've never become a Christian, we hope that something as you tune in will be said that will spark that interest in you, that the Spirit may speak to you and move you to take action so that you too may have the future and the hope that is enjoyed by the people of God. as we stand and sing our song.